Hey guys, welcome to the ride. My name is Gage, and in today's video, there's actually a lot. I should have planned this out better. We are going to talk about books. Now, if you are new to D&D, let's say you're brand new and you've never heard of this game, and you're thinking about possibly getting in, buying books to the game can be pretty confusing for new players. What I want to do today is give you guys kind of like a buyer's guide for what books you actually need and what things are going to be most useful to you if you're just starting out with Dungeons & Dragons. So, let's just hop right into it. The very first book that you are going to need if you are playing Dungeons & Dragons is the Player's Handbook. If there was one book that you could call the Dungeons & Dragons book, it's probably the Player's Handbook. Now, there are some people who might say that you need the first 3 books to get started, and I'll talk about the other 2 books later, but this one is by far, at least in my opinion, the most important. You could actually probably run a full game with just the Player's Handbook. It would be tough, and you'd have to make up a few things along the way, but you theoretically could. Inside the Player's Handbook, you'll find all the rules that you need to actually get started in Dungeons & Dragons. You'll also find useful tools for character creation, a lot of info on the mechanics of D&D, and really the entire rule set and how you're going to play. Now, if you're going to be in D&D as a player as opposed to a DM, this is a must. If you're going to be a DM, this is also a must. Again, you could pretty much run a game just with the rules in here alone. In fact, when I first started playing D&D, I began with just the Player's Handbook and just kind of found my way through the rest of the rules as we went along. Now, let's say that you have the Player's Handbook and you want to get more invested in Dungeons & Dragons, maybe become a DM, but you're not entirely sure where to go from there. And books can get pretty expensive, so you don't want to spend another $80 just yet. Well, the second most important book that you're going to need is the Dungeon Master's Guide. This book contains everything you need to be a DM, and to more importantly, be a good DM. There's a lot of rules in here that you can use even if you don't know if you have the right skills for the job. This book really helps you fill out those skills and gives you a lot of good tables and charts that are necessary for really helping your players through a story. This book, I would not say is as important as the Player's Handbook. The Player's Handbook still contains all the rules necessary to actually playing the game, but the Dungeon Master's Guide acts as a sort of help for DMs, helping them build worlds, know how to act out as NPCs, know how to run better combat, and, importantly, know what kind of special loots to give your players if they've done a good job. Now, once you have the Player's Handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide, the third and final book in the core book trilogy is the Monster Manual. In here, you'll find a collection of stat blocks and other things you'll need to run encounters in Dungeons & Dragons. There are hundreds of monsters to choose from that you can just kind of throw into your worlds whenever you need to. This book is really, really useful because it helps take away a lot of the planning you would need to do as a DM. Everything in here has been balanced out to player levels, and you can use that information to build encounters how you need to. Now, I would classify this as probably the third most important book in the core trilogy. It is one of the core D&D books, but it really isn't entirely necessary if you're just starting out. So one more time, just to reiterate, if you're just getting into it, Player's Handbook first, Dungeon Master's Guide second, and Monster Manual third. I think if you buy them in this order, that'll also help you get more comfortable with the rather complex rules for D&D. Now, let's say you bought all of the core books and you're looking to expand your game a little bit. Well, that is where the other books come into play. The official books by Wizards of the Coast, the Dungeons & Dragons Sourcebooks and Adventures. Inside these books, you'll find rules for worlds, how to run different NPCs that are already made and ready to go, and really unique settings that you can put your players through as they play D&D. These are really only necessary if you're going to be a DM, which is something that I do recommend after you've had some experience playing and after you've already purchased the 3 core rules. These act as a sort of supplement to the core rules themselves. Now, there are a ton of different campaign settings and adventures that you can run in Dungeons & Dragons. I just have a few of them here. You don't need any one to run the other, except in a few situations, maybe. But there are a ton of options that you can use to run your games. Now, if you want to keep expanding your collection of Dungeons & Dragons books, there are plenty of third-party books that have been made and are published. For example, I have here Tome of Beasts, published by Kobold Press. It's a really cool, almost like a second monster manual that contains a bunch of crazy, weird monsters and different things you can throw into your games to maybe surprise players who are a little more experienced and maybe have a little bit more familiarity with the monster manual and the classic rules. If you want to use these will add a bunch of variety to your games. However, if you want to use these, I recommend getting books that are pre-reviewed and are well balanced for Dungeons & Dragons. Sometimes the fan-made content can be a little overpowered or underpowered depending on what you use. Now, if you're a player playing in another DM's game, never use fan-made content or even expansion content without their permission. Make sure you talk to your DM about what source books, adventures, and other supplements can be used in their game and what cannot. Not all DM's games are the same in Dungeons & Dragons. The DM has very broad discretion over what rules can be used and how they can be used in the game. The DM really is the referee of the world. So if you want to use fan-made content, bring it up with your DM beforehand and don't throw it in during the game itself. There are tons of other options for different third-party content that you can use in your games of D&D, things that help DMs and players alike, and all of them are really, really useful. But just to reiterate, make sure that everybody at the table is in agreement as to what things can be used at the table and what things cannot. It can be very confusing for new players, especially if different rules from different books are being thrown in randomly. I have so many books. When in doubt, again, I just recommend sticking with the core 3, and if you can't afford all 3 books at the same time, no worries, because I certainly couldn't when I first started playing D&D. This one right here is the most important, the Player's Handbook. Now this is the Collector's Edition Player's Handbook. The ones you see at your game stores or bookstores will look a little bit different from mine, but the point is still the same. Make sure you start with this book and then move on to other books as you become more experienced. Alright, that's all that I had today. Just a short little video for you. Let me know in the comments if you like this order that I've given, or maybe, who knows, maybe some people think you should start with the DM's guide. I don't know. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Make sure that if you like this content to like the video and subscribe for future content. I'm thinking about possibly doing more little helps for new players who are just barely getting involved with the hobby. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.